Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Tanker's View with me, your average tanker, Tony. Well, spank my arse and pray St. Celestine, we're going to go there today. Longtime viewers of my channel know that I have a certain dislike of certain sci-fi tropes.
Wow.
They break my brain, they give me the tinglies in all the bad places.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
I had originally done this video on my old channel, see here? Hover tanks. But seeing as I've got, well, better everything now, I'm going to rehash it and get a few of my 3 or 4 main complaints about hover tanks out of the way in preparation for the future Xenos videos I got coming up. Because I'm nothing if not creatively bereft. But really, the reason I'm revamping this whole video is because, again, like I said, I've got 3 or 4 videos coming up on Xenos vehicles. Instead of rehashing the same 3 or 4 complaints over and over again for a few videos, which will tank my viewership faster than partnering with a certain social media influencer.
My God, Brittany! Well, you were thinking it. Yeah, well, you said it. You know, sometimes you sound just like a man.
I thought I'd just put it all into this one video here, so y'all can just be pointed to it instead of having to be told every time. I get more view retention, you get memes. Fair trade? No? Yeah.
Yes, definitely!
So before I dive right in, let's take care of the usual housekeeping. If you like what you see, please like, share, subscribe. Share the video around, maybe join the Patreon. I also have channels on Odyssey, Rumble, TikTok, Insta, X, or Twitter, whatever the crap Elon's calling it today. You know what? All the big socials have got me on it. It's either going to be A Tanker's View or Tony the Tanker. Links will be in the comments down below. And with all that out of the way, let's jump right back into it. So originally I was going to do this with my VTube avatar, but seeing as I have to break out the whiteboard a few times to draw some pictures, you're going to have to see me mug a few times and the whiteboard a few times. Rest of the time, B-roll stock footage. Yeah? Right on. So my first and biggest gripe about hover vehicles is that it's really an improper design for combat rules for several reasons, which I will now enumerate. One is going to be the weight, power, and maintenance. Next is going to be ground clearance and visibility. Next is going to be maneuverability and thrusters. Next is recoil, which is the biggest one of all. And finally is the inability to mitigate unforeseen ground hazards. Mines, IEDs, the etc., you know, the like. Now, I promise I will get to the hover tank and anti-grav tank by the end of the video. But first, we need to address the basics of what we have for comparison, as you all know. And well, because you know me, I'm nothing if not thorough. So for the sake of ease, I'll slap some chapter breaks in here and there. Now, what I'm going to lay out of what a hovercraft is typically used for today, and a brief history of what we've already attempted with the technology. Originally conceived of in the early 18th and 19th centuries, the concept of air-cushioned vehicles was more or less stagnant till the early 20th century, when the technology caught up with the design. Austria made the first one around 1917-ish, and a decade later, the Soviets also attempted to adapt the idea with varied levels of success. Now, air-cushioned vehicles saw an explosion of use and experimentation post-World War II to the late 70s, when the technology essentially stagnated and proved too expensive for most applications. Today, most air-cushioned vehicles are used as ferry, light icebreakers, rescue and patrol aircraft, with some militaries utilizing them as amphibious landing vehicles for heavy equipment and light patrol vehicles in certain circumstances. Now, as you can see, we've got substantial ground to cover, so let's just glide straight on in. Ba-dumts. The first up is the weight. Now, my average crowd of viewers are not a dumb lot. That's where I refer to you all as absolute legends. You're awesome, all of you. You rock. But as I was saying, military vehicles tend to be very heavy, much heavier than their civilian counterparts if they exist, like the Griffin 2000 TD. This is because they are covered in armor and additional systems, obviously. The more you add, the heavier it gets. That's just science. Now, as we increase weight, we also have to increase power to move that extra weight. This is where we run into an important problem with the square cubed law. The bigger we make the machine to install larger power plants, etc., the mass grows exponentially. This puts a real limit on the size and speed and power until the technology could improve. Logistically, the Russian Zuber and the American LCAC are about as large as you can effectively get before running into consistent major issues on the maintenance end. Think with frame fatigue from excessive vibration and the requirements of specialized facilities to dry dock these things. Now, yes, I'm aware that both of these machines are armed, but we're going to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to it a little bit later in the video, trust me. The next thing we need to look at is ground clearance. The average ground clearance for a hovercraft usually isn't going to be higher than a wheeled or a tracked ground vehicle. It's because there are limits to ground effect, which the hovercraft technically relies on. To demonstrate, I'm going to draw a little bit here. So let's say you have to cross some ground. It's uneven, filled with small obstacles because this isn't a video game. You could, in theory, raise your air cushion to the maximum allowed by your skirting and attempt to beeline across the terrain. But the cons to that are, you are now a much taller target. Certain obstacles are ruinous on skirting no matter how tough it is. Now a tracked vehicle will have to move a little slower, negotiate obstacles, but it won't use up to twice as much fuel doing so, nor raise its profile unnecessarily. Also ignoring the fact that any hover vehicle will lack the torque to move terrain out of the way in a way that tracked vehicles can. They're also far louder and produce a far larger infrared and acoustic signature than an average military vehicle. This ties directly into this next point, because most hover vehicles can't turn worth crap at speed. Sure, if you're standing still or moving slow, you'll turn a fair bit tighter, but the lack of friction with the ground will make turning and maneuvering an absolute nightmare without RCS thrusters at your pivot points. This is because hover vehicles are also susceptible to headwinds and crosswinds just like an airplane. It's going to be hard to hit anything in a firefight if you've also got to fight the wind to stay on target. This segues beautifully into my next point, recoil. I will say it once and I will say it 1,000 times. All weapons have recoil. Doesn't matter if it's a laser, a particle beam, or a missile. Nothing, and I repeat, nothing escapes the third law of motion. If a beam or anything leaves a barrel, it has a corresponding force applied to the vehicle. Now scale one of these hovercraft to the size of a main battle tank. Now if, and that's a big if they can withstand the added weight of main gun weaponry, the minute they start firing, it's going to turn the battlefield into hungry bumper cars. Now, I'll admit, a funny proposition until you realize that it's a bad day for everybody there. Now, I mentioned earlier the Zuber and the LCAC being armed. With the LCAC, it's nothing more than defensive weaponry in the form of a couple Mod Deuces or Mark 19s and other defensive light weaponry like M240s. Now, where the Zuber has a bunch of weaponry in excess of the LCAC, but again, it's all defensive weaponry. Surface-to-air missiles, AK-30s, and phalanx systems of the like. None of these weapons have enough recoil to affect a 300-ton air-cushioned vehicle.
That's a huge bitch!
Now, even smaller missiles like, for example, a HIMARS firing a Gimlers or even a Grad needs to be stationary to fire due to the back blast of a missile. So even using one as a mobile rocket launching system wouldn't be any more advantageous than a wheel or tracked vehicle. In fact, it'd probably be worse because you would have to power down the whole thing and lay it on the ground anytime you need to fire. And Lord knows how long it'll take to power back up. Finally, we get to the last issue, also the lowest tech issue. Mines, IEDs, vehicle traps. If you damage the fan or a skirt or anything like that on an LCAC, you now have an immobile skid and no effective method of recovery outside of a heavy pallet loading system. Now, even worse than that is that hover vehicles are even more susceptible to damage as these skirts will trap the blast. So even an open model, assuming that the down pressure from the vehicle would be completely ineffectual at diverting that blast or an explosively formed penetrator. There's just not enough there. And that's moving, and the blast is moving far too fast upwards. It's just a matter of physics. However, that downforce though is going to be more than sufficient to set off pressure mines, tripwires, tilt rods, command detonated. What the world has learned in the last 40 years is all the tech in the world doesn't mean crap if your enemy is completely unwilling to fight on your terms. And introducing vehicles that are far more vulnerable to adverse conditions to try and fight such an enemy, or even win an open battle, ultimately, it's just a big waste of resources. Now that I've extensively crapped all over this idea for the last however many minutes I've been doing this video, let's pick a couple of examples from sci-fi and see how they would stack up. So first I'll pick the Primaris Grav Tank and the Hover MRLS from Tiberian Sun. Now, the anti-grav units on the Primaris do wrap around the exterior, but you see they've got gaps, And boy, oh boy, do munitions and explosions love gaps. It focuses the damage. So how long does it take before the Tau, Chaos, or even the Orcs remember that landmines are a thing and start placing bets on how many times they can flip them mid-air? And given the Imperium's lack of logistical prowess, replacing or fixing these in the field will be enough to make any tech priest shit the entire Omnissiah's prayer out of its printer port. Now, the Hover MRLS from Tiberian Sun. It's slow, it can't turn well, it gets rocked by explosions. Sure, it can cross rivers faster than anything, and cross flat open ground faster than anything, but it shuts off anytime there's a change in the goddamn weather. Like, who thought putting that into production was a good idea? But you see, these things aren't taken into account when they just design these devices. They go for the rule of cool. They rely on you being ignorant or just not giving a crap. I don't think you're either. But I've shown you that wheeled or tracked vehicles are far superior to hover tonks, and you can do with this information what you will. You can apply it to your story writing, gameplay, or you can obsess about it at an artistic level like me. Now that all of this preamble is out of the way, you better believe we can get down to the Xenos vehicles now. So let's bring them on. Anyways, guys, if you liked the video, again, please like, share, subscribe. You can check me out on TikTok, Insta, X, Twitter, whatever the crap it's called. Basically any major social media platform. Look for A Tanker's View or Tony the Tanker. We're doing shorts now, which is a little bit more fun. Quick way to keep me up in the algorithm a little bit higher. But again, guys, thank you all for viewing. Thank you all for watching. You all rock. You're all legends. I will see you next time when we start covering some of those Xenos vehicles. Have a good one. Hope it helps.